Welcome to our Turing-Roche Knowledge Share series. The aim of these monthly events are to bring together members of the Turing, Roche networks and the wider scientific community to hear different perspectives on topics in data science and also build new connections. As the partnership research progresses as well, we'll also be regularly showcasing this at future events. So just to get us started, I'm just going to do a couple of slides on the partnership. Hopefully you can all see my screen. So the clue is in the name of the Turing-Roche partnership. It's a partnership between the Alan Turing Institute and Roche. Hopefully most of you are familiar with at least one of these organizations. The Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI. We do research in a huge number of disciplines, but the Turing-Roche partnership sits under our Health and Medical Sciences programme. Roche is a leading healthcare company established in 1896. They have a long-term interest in personalised healthcare, and they are also establishing a number of academic partnerships. So we launched our strategic partnership together in June 2021. And our kind of guiding light for the 5 years is our partnership North Star. So ultimately, we're collaborating to explore this term patient and disease heterogeneity, and doing this for advanced analytics. So basically why patients respond differently to treatment and why diseases manifest in different ways in different people. So as you can see, it's quite broad. So there's a lot of different research areas and activities we can explore in this area over the 5 years. So far, we've chosen 2 research themes, and you can find out a bit more about our current activities on our partnership page, which you can find on the Turing website. And what's not reflected in this kind of North Star is the connections and the collaborations we want to build between the 2 organizations and beyond. So it's really critical for us to be running events like these to get you all involved. So today's event theme is AI to clinical practice, which I think we can all agree is becoming a hot topic and more kind of part of the public discourse. For the partnership, this is really key. We want any kind of methodology we develop to be able to make an impact in the clinic. So I'm really excited to have our speakers here today to take us through some examples of this and discuss the kind of current challenges and opportunities in this area. So I'm delighted to welcome Konstanty Korski, who is a senior expert pathologist and R&D lead for digital pathology at Roche, and Dr. Nick Fuggle, who is a clinician, associate professor in rheumatology at the University of Southampton, and also a co-organiser of the Turing Clinical AI Interest Group, which is a group that the partnership are looking to collaborate with more closely. As mentioned, we'll be hearing from both our speakers, and then we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. So you can ask a specific question for an individual speaker, or you can ask a kind of broader question on AI to clinical practice for both of them to answer. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Konstanty, I will hand over to you if you're ready to share your screen.
Yes, thank you, Vicky. Let me share my screen and go to the slide mode. Let me know if this works.
That looks good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Vicky, and thank you for the kind invitation, and welcome from the sunny but a bit stormy today, probably Basel in Switzerland. As Vicky was saying, I'm Konstanty Korski. I'm a pathologist working in this group here in Basel, and I would like to focus today on this aspect or this problem of how to bring successful this AI-based medical solutions to the clinical practice and eventually to the patients. I will speak from the perspective of the pathologist, but I guess this perspective is also valid for other imaging-related solutions. Let me maybe start first with my background, and I will tell you why I'm actually speaking about this a bit later. So I'm a trained physician, so I finished my 6-year medical school in the early of 2000. And then I entered the pathology residency program in one of the oncology centers in Poland, which I finished after 5 years with my board certification exams. And then I've been working for 7 years in the same center as a staff pathologist. Then I switched gears of my career and joined Roche. It was in 2014. I joined the early development group that was focusing on biomarker discovery, where I actually started focusing on developing the digital pathology solutions. And then 3 years ago, I joined this group that I'm currently in, which is the digital pathology group, product family, how we call it, in the personal healthcare group in the product development. Why am I showing you this? Because as you can count, this is roughly 27 years of the career development. So I would like to be provocative here and maybe put a challenge. So can you imagine that, or could you think that this is possible to, for the AI solutions to turn this 27 years of human experience in the medical and the diagnostic field during the 1 year of training and basically provide a solution that can be purely based on AI? Of course, it's a provocative question, as I said, because it is the answer is only partially positive, I would say. There are currently on the market, there are some AI-based solutions in the digital pathology that have been trained using digital images of the pathologist samples, maybe a bit longer than 1 year, probably some of them like 2 or 3 years, but nevertheless, they are already FDA cleared or IVDR compliant. I'm just presenting you these 2 examples from Page and Ibex. They are focusing on diagnosing patients with a prostate cancer. But I'm showing you this to just emphasize that the technology is definitely nowadays capable of kind of turning this long-lasting, for human long-lasting experience into very powerful solutions in a much shorter time period. And it can do in a similar way. So basically pathologists, when during their training and then during the progress of their career, they just look at thousands of slides, right, of images of the samples of the patient tissue. And the same was done here for these 2 algorithms that I just showed that became a product. The developers, the manufacturers used thousands of images in case of the prostate, detect almost 40,000 to train the model, and then around 500 to validate it. In the gallon prostate from Ibex, it was actually the opposite. They used a smaller amount of images, but they validated it on the large amount of images. So it kind of, you know, it reflects the power of this technology, which probably most of you already know about, right? But at the same time, there is a question, right? Is the recipes for success in that field, in the medical field, for developing this AI-based solution only sitting on these 2 components, on the large enough data set and the proper model architecture? And again, the answer is not so simple, because there are a couple of challenges that definitely are in the field and that we need to face and find a solution for before we can actually successfully deploy these solutions. Here you have 4 key elements, key challenges that we are struggling with. This is not an exhaustive list, of course, but definitely these are very important challenges. The first one is the data quality. So you can have definitely a lot of data, right, to train your models, but it's not only about the breadth of the data repositories that you are using, but also about the depth of these data. So how much they actually represent the real world diversity of your studied population, right? This has to be taken into account. So it's not only, you know, how many of these slides, but also from what type of patients, from which centers, from which continents you are using this. Then there is a second element, the healthcare regulations. This field is currently evolving very fast, and there are certain developments in EU, in US, and also around the world to actually regulate properly this field, because of course these solutions are eventually going to be used for helping patients, for helping humans. So there needs to be a way to ensure that they are safe and accurate. The third element is the clinical deployment itself. So we need to make sure that these solutions can be deployed in the existing workflows. And as I call it, they have to be seamlessly disruptive, right? So you still need to kind of disrupt the existing workflows, but do it in a way that is at least impactful for the current state of the art. And lastly, the infrastructure. Of course, these models are, these algorithms are digital algorithms, so there has to be an infrastructure in place that allows the deployment and interoperability of these models. So let me walk you very briefly through a couple of these elements. Of course, it is impossible in going into too much details over this 20 minutes, but let me try to address a couple of these points. About data quality, there was an interesting study recently published that focused on this around roughly 500 FDA-approved AI products in the medical field. And what was interesting there, what you can see here, the summary of this research, that only a couple of percent of these manufacturers that are actually developing these tools can show that they include the right diversity of the data into their training and validation models. Actually, when you look here in the aggregate reports and stratified reporting that they published, for the patient cohorts, only less than 2% of these studies were conducted on the multi-race or actually validated on the multi-race or multi-gender cohorts. And only less than 1% approvals happen with the performance figures across genders and race. So it shows you that majority, the vast majority of these studies were done probably only on using the patients from let's say from only one race type or specific ethnicity background. The same for the medical device themselves. For the use of different clinical side, only less than 2% were conducted in the were validated in the multi-site fashion, and also in terms of the annotators that have been used to provide the ground truth for these algorithms. As you see, again, less than 2% reported on the profiles of these annotators and readers. So, for example, what was the experience, the level of the experience of the pathologists that provided this type of ground truths. So as you see, that the data quality is one of the key elements here. Then another point, I mentioned healthcare regulations. Here you have the current thinking behind the regulation in the US. So there's different classes of devices defined by FDA, and the new regulations, IVDR regulations, with these 4 classes of devices in EU. And as you see, it's already a long list. Probably most of our digital pathology algorithms will fall in this moderate risk or class of devices, so class C or D in EU or class 2 in US. Nevertheless, the point here is that regulators are working currently very hard to find the right angle, so not to discourage the developers from deploying the solutions, but at the same time providing the right legal framework for these solutions, to, as I said, to be safe and accurate. There's a very interesting element in this topic. This is the element of explainability of these models. As you know, some of these models are working as a kind of like a black box, and the regulators are leaning toward the decision or the decisions that these models should be explainable. So there should be a way for the user, for the in this case healthcare professional like a pathologist, to actually see how the model makes the decision about the final prediction. This is very important aspect from the regulatory point of view, and at the end also from the adoption point of view. Now, the clinical deployment aspect, as I said, I like to speak about this as a seamless disruption. And as you know, this here, what I'm showing here, this is a very simplistic view of the patient journey in the healthcare systems. So you have first the patient who has a being suspicious for having a cancer. Then there is a diagnostic workup, and part of this diagnostic workup is imaging element, so radiology and pathology. And based on the summative report, the decision about the treatment is then decided at the end. So as you know, this is very simplistic, because some of you may have been patients, or you have patients in your families, and you know that this doesn't work that way, and it's a lengthy process. Still, it's already an established process, and it's highly regulated. So now imagine that we, with our digital pathology solutions or any kind of AI-based algorithms, we are entering this and trying to fit these solutions into this workflow. So it has to be done as seamlessly as possible, because you can imagine that the image that is being used by the radiologists or pathologists need to go into the image analysis platform where the algorithm can be run. Then, of course, you have still this element of explainability. So the expert need to look into the input, verify the input, also sometimes verify the output of this algorithm, and then eventually provide the final prognostic or predictive score, depending, of course, what the algorithm is intended to do, to the clinician in the format that the clinician can accept this and use it as a support for their decision-making process. So it has to be done, as I said, in a way that the expert, the human expert, can actually work with this, can accept it, and use it in the clinical decision-making process. The topic of infrastructure is also very important, because it's obvious, right? These are digital solutions, so they require a digital ecosystems. Here you have an example on the left, what we call the analog workflow in the pathology lab, but many pathology labs in the world are currently transitioning into this digital workflow. Some are even trying to make it fully digital. But it's not only about, you know, taking the image of the slide and just providing it to the pathologist. It of course requires integration of the hardware, in this case slide scanners, into the LIMS system in laboratory informatics systems, and then combining all the patient metadata and providing it to the pathologist. Also, there is this physical aspect, where to put such a scanner, how to make this workflow that is already very well established in the pathology lab, and how to fit the digital aspect of this workflow into the existing infrastructure. Not even mentioning about, you know, how to store this data, how to make them available for different users. These are of course the challenges that needs to be addressed before these solutions can be successfully deployed. But then there is also this final challenge, and again, I'm probably provocative here, but to me, the ultimate challenge in this context is human. As Fei Li, who sits behind the ImageNet creation, said that she's teaching her students that there is nothing artificial about the artificial intelligence because it is made by humans, intended to behave by humans, and ultimately to impact human lives and human society. And that's definitely true. And here I'm using this picture from the movie that some of you may have seen, The Minority Report. And you know that these things can go very wrong. So we need to make sure that the human healthcare professionals who are using these tools, but also the patients who will be the final who will benefit from these solutions, that they can actually accept these solutions in their workflow. There was actually, I'm not showing it here, but there was an interesting study performed in UK on the acceptance by the patients these AI-based solutions. And one of the key elements there was that the patients would like to be informed that the decision about their treatment, for example, was made with help of AI, and this information has to be transparent and available. So there was also one interesting study where a couple of pathology experts were questioned in the context of how they see the development and deployment of digital pathology solutions in the next couple of years until 2030. And you can read this about this in this paper. But what's interesting here, and I'm putting one of the figures, I'm copying here one of the figures from the paper. The experts very strongly agree on a couple of points related to the integration of artificial intelligence in pathology. And if you focus on these two last points, it's very intriguing, because it says as long as AI is used as a supportive method, ethical issues will be minor. However, when AI takes over tasks from the pathologist, i.e. making a diagnosis without human oversight, it will face major ethical challenges, and it's of course not surprising. But at the end of the day, pathologists will still be legally responsible for diagnoses made with the help of AI. So it means that in order to really have a successful AI-based tool, we need to convince the users that this tool is really reliable, and it can be safely used to make a decision about the patient treatment. So what are the key messages that I would like you to take from this presentation? Is that to make these successful algorithms, think about three elements. Make it reliable not only in the sense that they meet the specific metrical requirements like sensitivity, specificity, AUC, and so on, but also making sure that you use the proper data sets with the proper quality of that information. Then make it explainable. So make sure that the humans who are interacting with these tools can actually look under the hood in a way, maybe not understanding the whole machine learning process that is behind, but at least be able to verify the input and the output of these algorithms, and make it interoperable. So make sure that these tools can be seamlessly deployed in the current workflow. So for that, you also need to probably understand what is the current state of the art, and think how my solution will actually potentially can be deployed in the clinical practice. And finally, I also a bit provocative put this quote from Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI. I would just say, keep coding and keep calling and keep coding, right? And have fun until the AI will lead to the end of the world. Well, of course, it's a joke, but definitely we are still in the beginning of this journey, and it can provide lots of very valuable solutions and support in the healthcare, but it has to be done having this end points in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Konstanty. I feel like keeping us real at the end is what we needed. We will now hand over to Nick for his talk. In the meantime, please feel free to pop any questions in the Q&A in the bottom bar. And after Nick's talk, we'll have a discussion with both our speakers. So handing over to you, Nick.
Great. Can you see that, Vicky?
Yeah, that was seamless.
Excellent. So pleased to hear it. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And thank you for Konstanty. I think that you'll find that some of the things that I say really dovetail with some of the messages that we've just heard. So yes, my name is Nick Fuggle. I'm a clinical academic based at Southampton in the MRC Life Course Epidemiology Centre. But I've got an interest in clinical AI, not only from being one of the co-organisers of the clinical AI interest group at the Turing, but also through my research. And so my talk's going to go through 3 different sections. Firstly, laying out the smorgasbord of ways that AI is being deployed within clinical practice, or aiming to be deployed within clinical practice. 2 is talking through how that's impacted on some of my own research. And 3, about the clinical AI interest group and some of its activities. So here we have it, the main areas of interest for clinical AI, and computer vision, drug discovery, natural language processing, and electronic health records. The biggest by far is that area of computer vision. And out of the 500 FDA AI approved tools, out of those 500, 75% are within the field specifically of radiology. This is partly to do with large radiology data sets being available and being ripe for the development of tools using machine learning. And within radiology, the main areas are probably mammography, which is being used in clinical practice already in some areas, and also nodule detection for lung cancer screening. But as we just heard, pathology, so the advent of whole slide imaging and photography, means that algorithms can view the entire pathology slide, pick out areas of interest and focus for pathologists to then focus on in clinical practice, and ophthalmology, using retinal photographs in order to predict outcomes of hypertension and diabetes. Next, drug discovery. So the development of protein folding algorithms such as AlphaFold means that now from a simple chain of amino acids, we can predict what the shape of a protein will be. And this is being used in order to identify novel drug targets that can target specific areas of disease. Molecular analysis, of course, incredibly important, using omic research and using unsupervised approaches in order to identify biomarkers of disease and novel therapeutic targets. And this very much speaks into the Turing-Roche partnership. But of course, literature reviews, so companies like Benevolent AI, who are using natural language processing models, but in order to mine vast swathes of literature, not just from medicine, but from other areas of science, in order to identify connections between diseases and possible therapeutic targets, or potentially redeploying medications in other disease areas. Natural language processing has, of course, come to the fore through the rise of GPT, or the generative pre-trained transformer models, the latest being GPT-4, which is thought to be trained on over 1 trillion different parameters. And there's been a lot of work specifically, actually, though, in medicine, using medical data sets for training up those large language models. And if you can see just on this graph here, so we start in December 2020, And the gold standard really in this area at the moment, or the yardstick by which many of these models are measured, is the US MLEs, or US medical licensing examinations. These are sat by all US medical students when they come to the end of their time at medical school, and it's very much the way in which their future jobs and training programs are decided. And actually a similar model is about to start in the UK as well. But anyway, in December 2020, these models were performing at getting about a third of questions right in these final US MLE examinations. But Google Health were very proud to announce that in December 2022, their MedPalm model, so a specific medical large language model, got over two-thirds of questions correct, and thus reaching the threshold for the recognized pass mark. But actually since then, we'll then see that MedPalm 2 came out only about a month ago, and that reached a performance of 85%. So really exciting development in that area. And then electronic health records. These were an enormous resource containing vast swathes of information about the clinical status of our patients. And so there's work going on to develop structures within those, not only so that a large set of notes can be distilled down into a simple to understand summary for a patient or for a clinician to be able to rapidly get to the heart of the key issues with that patient, but also to introduce structure to the data sets so that those can be used for research purposes or for training machine learning models. And of course, using electronic health records in order to predict outcomes, taking clinical parameters when a person enters the emergency department and identifying those patients that are at risk of deterioration and may need early access to intensive therapies. So these are the main areas of interest. And actually my area of research interest is mainly in computer vision and in musculoskeletal aging and osteoporosis. So for the uninitiated, osteoporosis is an incredibly prevalent condition affecting approximately half of women over the age of 50 and about 1 in 5 men in that same age group. As a disease, it's very difficult to identify. It's not heralded by symptoms of pain or a prodrome before the development of the disease, and is often silent, where it is silent until the moment of fracture. But there are various imaging modalities that can be deployed in order to try and identify people who have got weaker, thinner bones. And dual X-ray absorptiometry, and we see a picture of one here, is that is most commonly used in clinical practice at the moment. And a single figure is derived from this by measuring the differences in absorption, and that is bone mineral density. And that does correlate with a person's risk of fracture. But of course, bones are far more complex than just being distilled down into a single number. And the concept of bone microarchitecture, which incorporates the outer bone, here we have it here, so the cortex, and the inner complex trabecular bone may well, changes in those may well predispose people to fractures. And so over the last 10 years, there's been this development of the HRPQCT, the high resolution peripheral quantitative computed tomography. And this is a very specialized scan, which takes about 100 slices at the distal radius or wrist bone and at the distal tibia or shin bone over the distance of about a centimeter. And when those 100 slices are combined three-dimensionally, it gives an image, as you can see there, of such detail that it's colloquially known as a virtual bone biopsy. But what actually happens when you get the readout of an HRPQCT is that it spits out over 50 different parameters. And these are simply numbers that are associated with the thickness of the cortex, for example. And these are unwieldy if they're ever going to be used in clinical practice. So we wonder whether the use of computer vision could be used in order to try and draw information out of these scans that could then be used easily in clinical practice. Hello. And so we used a supervised machine learning model, which takes a labeled data set. So in our case, these are tibial images that have been labeled for people who have or haven't had a fracture, which is then used to train up a model, in our case, a random forest. And once the model is adequately trained, unlabeled data is presented to the model, and it's asked to predict whether that person has or has not had a fracture. But we were very interested in whether the individual compartments of bone microarchitecture, so the outer cortex and the inner trabecular, could be segmented out, and whether those could be used in order to add to fracture discrimination. So we set up an automatic segmentation model. And here we have an example of the original cross-section scan, with 1 being the soft tissues, 2 being the cortex, and 3 being the trabecular areas. And 47 scans, so that's nearly 5,000 different slices, were manually labeled using the Label Me tool to separate out the cortex, and thus to be able to separate out the trabecular as well. And we then used a convolutional neural network and the UNet model, which has a contracting element, which reduces down the image into what is important, but a very low number of features, and then an expansive element, which then shows you the location of where those important elements of the image are within the image as a whole. And using that, we managed to produce an automatic segmentation algorithm that performed very well. And so the intersection over union, which is a measure of how well, and the overlap between 2 boxes, was nearly 97%. And that's between the manual and automatic. So that's good performance. So we separated out our 3-dimensional tube of cortex and our 3-dimensional tube of trabecular, and used those in our random forest models. And here we have our results. And before I go into these, I'll just introduce the concept of a receiver operating characteristic curve. These were developed in the Second World War in the context of radar. And the key here, when it's plotting the false positive rate against the true positive rate, is the area underneath these different lines. So if there's 50% of the graph which is underneath the line, as we see here, the performance of that discriminator would actually be no better than tossing a coin. It would be completely random. But as it moves closer and closer towards 1 or towards 100% of this area under the curve, then the discrimination performance improves. And so we see here that when DEXA alone was used, the performance was really only slightly better than a random discriminator. But when we used an unsegmented model, or just the cortex on its own, the performance was a bit better, at near 90%. But it really leapt up with the trabecular compartment on its own. So that's the inner bone on its own. And when we took the inner bone features using the computer vision model, which was a local 3-dimensional local binary pattern model, and the cortex separately, and we joined those together, the performance was even better at 97%. So we showed that there was benefit of using this deep learning method for performing the 3-dimensional segmentation, and that when we fused the cortex and the trabecular compartments together after they'd been segmented, this had a greater association with fractures. So we move on now to the clinical AI interest group. So this was founded almost exactly a year ago. And since that time has grown to a membership of over 350. I am one of the co-organizers, together with my colleagues Alicia Davies and Zhao Liu and Joe Alderman, the latter two from the University of Birmingham and Alicia Davies from the Turing. And together we run this group, having monthly webinars, but also supplementing it with other activities, including a fringe event at this year's AI UK conference. And also we're running a summer school, and we've actually started to develop supra interest groups, areas of super interest for our membership that are around particular clinical areas. So at the moment, those are computer vision and medical imaging, women's health, and anesthetics and ITU. And we're looking to develop further ones. In fact, Konstanty, on our roadmap immediately is a pathology interest group. So you'd be very welcome to join us in that. But we've got three main aims as part of the clinical AI group: sharing, educating, and pooling. And I'll run through those now. So sharing, it's a very hot day down here on the south coast of the UK at the moment, and I'm sure there'll be many ice creams being eaten by children in this demographic. I don't think there'll be many examples of sharing that are quite as good as that being demonstrated here. But as a clinical AI interest group, we want to share knowledge, expertise, and experiences from within the field. And so in each of our webinars, we have a thematic session, and these have been very diverse and ranged from, in the early days, on the left here, we had Annabelle Painter and Mike Nix come from NHS England and Health Education England to talk about their report on understanding healthcare workers' confidence in artificial intelligence. We had Baptiste Basie come and talk to us about developing guidelines for the early stage clinical evaluation of decision support systems, so before they're fully through regulation. We've collaborated with the Health Equity Interest Group. We were joined by Dom Cushnan, who leads the NHS AI Lab, talking about the national strategy for computer vision and AI. We were joined by Phil Martin, who is a partner and patent lawyer, who came to talk to us about his experiences of patenting AlphaFold for DeepMind. And Alistair Denniston joined us for our AI Fringe event, fresh from having written his Regulatory Horizons Council report on regulation of AI software as a medical device. So educating, and this really sings into one of the elements that Konstanty was talking about, and the area of patients and how important education is for clinician education is for patients. And so I explain it like this, that clinicians need to understand AI and machine learning, not just well enough for their own comprehension, but they need to be able to understand it to a level at which they're confident to explain to patients and communicate to patients how these tools are affecting their care, so that patients can be adequately consented for the use of those tools whilst they are on their care journey. And so we're developing a suite of educational tools, and one of the key elements of that is our summer school, which is running this summer, which aims to take AI naive clinicians through from introductions to machine learning and AI, through some of the elements of ethics and challenges, and then also a practical session in which they'll tune parameters within an algorithm in order to enhance the performance and diagnostic performance of that within a cancer spotting algorithm. And finally, this is a photograph taken from one of our clinical AI socials. Not really. This is a photograph, I think, taken from a swimming pool in China. But we want to be a pool of resources that can feed into lots of different activities within the Turing. So we're working with colleagues, and we're about to start developing clinical vignettes for AI, highlighting some of the ethical issues of using AI in healthcare. We're working in some computer knowledge areas as well, and we're keen to feed into any of the Turing-Roche activities that might be relevant. And so I'd like to finish by thanking you all for listening and warmly inviting you to our next clinical AI meeting, which is on Wednesday, 21st of June at 12 p.m. We will be collaborating with our colleagues in mental health and data science. And if you want to sign up, you can find the clinical AI interest page on the Alan Turing website, and you can sign up from there. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm just on spotlight you. So we've got just over 10 minutes for questions. So as I mentioned, you can pop your question in the Q&A box, which you should be able to find at the bottom bar of the Zoom, or feel free to raise your virtual Zoom hand, and you can ask your question live. I think we've got one in the box at the moment. Let me have a look. Oh, it's quite a lengthy one for you, Nick. So my understanding is that so far medical imaging AI algorithm.
Vicky, can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead. Saves me reading it out, and then you can give any context. Yeah, go ahead, Ashish.
So excellent talks, Konstanty and Nick. So my question to Nick is, I've worked briefly in radiology AI, and So far, there were these like piece solutions, right? There'll be like a chest X-ray algorithm and a intracranial hemorrhage detection algorithm and like XYZ. So I was just wondering, and over the last 6 months, there have been incredible developments on the AI front with GPT-4 and more recently by MedPalm 2 recently came out from Google Health. So I was just wondering, with things like MedPalm 2, which can handle multiple modalities, do you think we are heading to like this one model which rules them all, which can handle pathology, which can handle imaging and like all kinds of imaging, and can even like assist a primary care doc to do differential diagnosis given symptoms? We just kind of love to hear your thoughts on that.
You're on mute, Nick.
What I was saying is that that's a really good question, and I'm not sure that anyone truly knows the answer to it. I think that one of the concerns is that in using general models that you're then open to biases, or it may not be as well deployed in certain populations, and also I think you've got to be really sure of what the training data sets are that are being used in order to inform and train up those algorithms. So, for example, in the UK, there's already work going on to develop a large language model that is trained up particularly on NHS data. And my gut feeling is that you might have a large language model behind it, but there'll be model bolt-ons that'll feed off information from the large language model, but that will be tailored to particular localities, particular populations, and particular demographics. That's my overwhelming impression. What I'd be interested to know what yours is.
I am kind of in the same boat. I feel like the developments are happening so quickly, it's hard to make any reasonable predictions which will last for a. So MedPalm seems exciting. Yeah, I think also to publish a paper is one thing, to actually deploy it in a clinical setting with real patients is a whole different ballgame. Yeah, so I think from my very little experience with radiology AI, getting it, you can achieve high accuracy and AUC and like these nice numbers, but getting it into the typical clinical radiology workflow is very challenging. And sometimes it works well at one hospital and may not work well when it on a different scanner or a different cohort of patients. So it was just a topical question because there's this like hype and everybody seems to be talking about GPT-4, and so I was just wondering what your experience or what the NHS is kind of
I think it's going to be a while before anything that uses GPT-4 is going to be able to be used in the NHS, because there are big regulatory hurdles to overcome before that can happen, I think. One just point that feeds into also something that Konstanty said, which is around training models as well. So Zhao Liu, one of my co-organizers in the clinical AI interest group, did some work recently which showed that actually within, I think it was COVID chest x-rays, there's a particular data set that has been used widely for the training of algorithms, and there have been actually a number of papers that have been published using that training set. But in the small print of the original paper that describes and created the training set, they talk about how they include some pediatric chest x-rays, but that's been largely forgotten in later iterations. And so these algorithms are being developed using pediatric chest x-rays as well, and children are likely to have better outcomes than adults, and so it's adversely benefiting the algorithm, because if it sees a pediatric chest x-ray, it then knows automatically because it looks very different, that the COVID outcomes are going to be better for it. So just a little word of warning there when it comes to imaging data sets.
Right. Yeah, I think just my final thoughts on this, right? As you mentioned, the particular cohort of patients also, like, you need to do extensive clinical testing on very different patient cohorts and kind of like be satisfied that it does well on like, I don't know, 95% of what you're going to see in the real world. Can't perhaps get to 100, but like, try to. So I think it'll, there's all the excitement is great, but it'll take a while to be actually deployed in clinical practice.
Thank you so much. We have another question in the chat about regulation, but Konstanty, I just wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to add on to anything there.
No, I mean, yeah, I agree with everything that has been said before. As I said, it's the deployment is a very complicated aspect, right? As was said before, right? The publication is one thing, but the real changing the clinical practice is the other. And as it was clear from the poll, right, that you set up in the beginning, that people are thinking, infrastructure definitely important. Regulations important. There's also the aspect of reimbursement. We should not forget that these tools need to be, of course, someone needs to pay for using this tool, and that's another big bucket that I didn't even mention. But this needs to be addressed. So therefore, maybe one additional comment. It definitely it's a long way to go, right? But we need to start with the baby steps. So that's why I was showing this example of these two first algorithms in digital pathology that have been approved for primary diagnostics. And these algorithms, actually, one of them works in a way that it doesn't even say, this is cancer, this is not. It just says, this is suspicious, this is not, right? So if we start, implementing this way of thinking into healthcare professionals' mind, and then eventually to present it properly to the patients, as Nick was saying, right, to teaching healthcare professionals how to actually explain it also to their patients, right? This is probably the way we can pave this further, because otherwise, if we start trying to develop prognostic algorithms and deploy them, we will be I mean, we can all of this can go very wrong, because the reproducibility, the generalizability of these algorithms, this is still a big issue. And when it comes to the regulations, I'm not a regulatory expert, right? So I cannot really comment in very detail here, but definitely there is an ongoing dialogue with the agency like FDA, like EU Commission and EMA, how to properly develop these tools and how to regulate them in the way that does not, do not kill the concept, but at the same time deliver something that is safe.
Yeah, thank you for getting ahead on that question as well. Nick, I don't know if you have, so we've got one in the chat about kind of regulation, another one about kind of what your opinion would be on a kind of regulatory path where AI models are required to pass a kind of clinical trials under supervision by regulatory agencies. Again, I know you're not a regulator, but any kind of thoughts there?
No, but there is a pathway, and it is clearly set out. I mean, it takes time, and it needs data, and it needs rigorous trial within clinical practice, and I think that's completely right. And I think in this very fast moving area, actually, it's completely right for regulators to actually take their time, for us to understand exactly what these tools are looking at, how they're coming to their diagnoses, and also how they benefit patients in the longer term. So yeah, I'm all for that.
Perfect. I think we've got about 2 minutes left. I might just ask, I'm going to use my host privilege and ask a very quick question. So I think kind of both your talks today kind of covered pathology, imaging, and these are kind of easier ways of kind of getting AI integrated into clinical practice. but are there aspects of clinical practice where you think they're going to kind of be the last to adopt AI, or perhaps will never kind of adopt AI? So I just wanted to get a bit of a hot question just to finish on. Nick or Konstanty, either of you to go first.
So wait, the question is, which areas will never adopt AI?
Yeah, or will kind of be the last to.
I'd like to think that there won't be any.
That's also good.
That don't. I think that the computer vision is the lowest hanging fruit. I think Alexa type models to help provide information for clinicians might not be that far away. I think there's a lot of area in drug development, so it'll be interesting to see those areas come out first.
Amazing, thank you. Konstanty?
I would definitely agree. I was almost tempted to say that pathologists will never accept this because they are probably the most conservative specialty in the medical field, but this is already happening, so it's a good sign.
Amazing. I think there's a good note to finish on.